Countries all over the world are facing increasingly complex challenges due to climate change, such as more frequent disasters, water and food insecurity, and the loss of natural resources and biodiversity. Unplanned urban growth, ecosystem degradation, and poverty are making communities even less resilient to climate shocks. To reduce climate risks, governments often embark on traditional engineering projects, such as dams, seawalls, and conventional drainage, also known as grey infrastructure. Increasingly, though, experts are turning to nature to help. Known as nature-based solutions and sometimes called green infrastructure, these interventions use strategic protection, management, or restoration of ecosystems to address climate resilience and adaptation in cost-effective ways. NBS can help countries meet climate resilience goals while also providing benefits like recreation, biodiversity, and better water quality. Often, combining green and grey infrastructure can be more cost-effective than purely green or grey interventions. At the World Bank and Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, or GFDRR, experts across sectors are already supporting countries to leverage nature-based solutions to make communities more climate resilient. Since 2012, the World Bank has approved financing for more than 100 on-the-ground investments across almost 60 countries. For instance, in Mozambique, the World Bank, along with KfW, supported the transformation of the vital port city of Beira with a mix of critical drainage, urban parks, and stream renaturation that restored the Chiveva River's capacity to mitigate floods and created a green space that provides recreational and cultural spaces. In Colombo, the World Bank supported the protection of the city's vital wetlands and helped integrate them into the region's flood reduction systems. Now, the wetlands also provide recreational and biodiversity benefits, along with reducing flood risks. To scale up the support for projects like this, the World Bank, with the support from GFDRR and the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership, launched the Global Program on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Resilience. The Global Program aims to be the expert hub for NBS at the World Bank that supports countries identify, prepare, and implement NBS for climate resilience. To learn more, visit www.naturebasedsolutions.org for examples of projects and implementation guidance. By pairing smart engineering with the power of nature, the World Bank is working to support countries and make the world a safer and more resilient place.
Today, I'm talking to Brandon Youngman, a senior disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank's Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, who leads the global program on nature-based solution for climate resilience. Hi, Brandon, good to see you.
Hi, Marcia. How are you? Great to be here.
Good. I would like to begin with a couple of questions to sort of set the scene for the broader conversation that we'll have later on. In the past, nature-based solutions have gained a lot of popularity worldwide as a disaster risk reduction tool. But at the same time, there is a clear message coming across that the world needs better hydromet services and early warning services. I'm wondering to what extent nature-based solutions depend on hydromet information and whether anything could be done to improve the linkages.
Yeah, thanks, Marcia. I think that's an excellent question, and I'm super happy that we are able to have this conversation, which I don't think happens often enough. So let me start. First of all, indeed, we see that nature-based solutions are gaining ground as an effective way to help reduce climate risk while bringing out additional benefits for biodiversity, local communities, local economy. And from our experience working with countries around the world, we see indeed that it's exactly this multi-beneficial nature of NBS that make these solutions attractive. A rapidly developing city, for example, has great benefits of safeguarding their wetlands or developing urban parks, in addition to investing in the necessary gray infrastructure, we say, such as drainage and levees. At the World Bank, we just finished a new review of our portfolio to understand what is the scope of investments at NBS over the past years. And since 2012, we see that the bank has invested over 5 billion in project components, activities with nature-based solutions in them. So you see this is quite significant already, and the trend is definitely upwards. Now, I think there's a strong relationship between hydrometeorological information and decisions on optimal investments in adaptation. So almost everywhere, and especially in densely populated areas like cities, the key challenge is really to find the best balance between the different types of investments and policies and have long-term plans for maintaining and managing those. And there are specific flexibilities that nature-based solutions offer when it comes to climate change and climate extremes. Ecosystems can continue adapting. A sandy beach, a wetland area, or a mangrove system, for example, can grow and expand to keep up with sea level rise. And the river that is given enough space can go and move a bit with increasing and decreasing rainfall patterns. But there are limitations to this flexibility. If climate change outpaces the ability of a wetland system to adapt, it may get lost and the communities may find themselves without any protection whatsoever. Or if cyclones or storms that were previously unheard of are hitting areas with coral reefs or mangroves, these ecosystems become damaged or destroyed. So understanding that information is critical. At an urban or river basin level as well, the rainfall patterns 30 years from now are crucial for the choice that you have to make now on nature-based solutions, including the types, the vegetation types, and the potential artificial watering that you may need if the rainfall patterns are not quite enough to maintain that vegetation. So understanding the changes of both the extremes and the averages is critical, and that collaboration there is key. And that challenge surely does not only apply to nature-based solutions, it equally does to gray infrastructure or to those combinations of gray and green infrastructure. And we don't always think enough about it, I think. So once you start constructing a dike, for example, or a drainage system, it should have a 30, 50, 70-year lifespan to be cost effective. And once you design and build it, adapting it because the sea level rose faster than you thought or the storms are more intense than predicted is very difficult, and it's also very expensive. So then finally, maybe we also need to work to combine flood and drought protection investments through increasing capacity for early warning. So NBS solutions often will never provide 100% protection against flood and droughts, neither will gray infrastructure protections. And combining this effectively with seasonal and short-term early warning systems is crucial. So we really need to strengthen the link between the planning of NBS and the development of hydrometeorological data and information. And I think in many cases, the people planning NBS investments are not aware of what the hydromet community can deliver. And the other way around, the hydromet community may not always know what type of information these kind of projects need. So it's great that we have this conversation today to bring this a step closer. Yeah,
this is very interesting. So I hear that in this mix of opportunities and challenges, you also have to kind of like lay the path for some strategic decisions for the countries. And following up on that and reflecting a little bit on realities that the World Bank's Hydromet program is facing, I wanted to ask you the following. So there is an overall agreement that society and the global economy needs, let's say, better hydromet and early warning services. However, it is quite challenging to convince financial decision makers sometimes to invest more in this area of public services. What has been your experience with nature-based solutions? Why should countries invest in nature-based solution in this context of the new decarbonized economy, for example?
Yeah, thanks, Masha. Indeed, another great question. And I think from my perspective, there's a few different angles to that, to the answer to that. So first of all, I would say there's an increasing understanding that we need to invest in nature in general, and we need to do it big. So we're still losing natural areas and species at record levels, natural systems that support our planet and much of our economy. And basically, they're one of the main pillars that we have in our ability to mitigate climate change through carbon storage as well. So without preserving nature in general, meeting either economic development and climate goals will be impossible. Now, when it comes to nature-based solutions for climate resilience specifically, the story is a bit more nuanced, a bit more complex. And what every country and indeed every individual city, every individual project needs to do is take into account the entire range of benefits when deciding on climate adaptation investments. Now, I'm from the Netherlands myself, and I know that physical protection offered by these climate adaptation interventions is the most important thing. So my own country would be underwater if we just let nature go its course. So we do need that gray infrastructure. And the key is not to look only at the physical protection levels when looking at financing and the need for financing in NBS, but also take into account the benefits for the environment, the local communities, job creation, recreation, fisheries. And that's where really we see that the combination of green and gray and often nature-based solutions by themselves come out on top and are an interesting investment to make in Beira, Mozambique, for example, where the World Bank and the government of Germany jointly financed the creation of one of Africa's largest park with a dedicated flood management function. You can really see this firsthand, where this park does not only provide protection of the city against flooding, but it's a vibrant new center of the city, providing children and families with a place to relax, to play, host weddings, other socioeconomic activities. And the tidal system is home to fish, crabs, and birds. And when you walk there, it's easy to imagine how only investing in hard riverbank protection would have missed out on creating all of those benefits, also economic benefits, while probably spending an equivalent amount of money that you would. Having said that, securing financing of any public investment is a challenge. It's true for Hydromet, and it's certainly also true for NBS. And there's a global shortfall in investments in adaptation and in general, which is also includes the nature-based solution. I think one opportunity that we have with NBS is that it can be integrated in general infrastructure, urban planning, urban adaptation investments. So when securing financing for a highway, consider including NBS interventions as part of that to prevent flood and landslide risk. When investing in urban planning and flood control, we can work with the private sector and available public financing streams to include NBS interventions alongside investments in infrastructure, drainage, and housing. And that way we can bring out more investment in NBS. Now, finally, there are a few new financing approaches that are becoming significant for NBS and a potential good opportunity. Carbon offsets, when done well, could bring private sector financing towards NBS. And so can innovative system things like blue bonds, green bonds, and coastal flood insurance solutions that can help pay for ecosystem protection, where these ecosystems are providing this climate resilience function to the coast. But there's still a lot of work to do to scale these solutions in a good way. So overall, I think we're quite early still in the implementation of NBS, and more successful and well-documented examples are definitely needed. More effort, data, and financing is needed, but I do think we're on the right path, and while working to address several other environmental issues, we can strengthen the adaptation to climate change through NBS.
Great, thank you. I think you gave us a lot of excellent points for follow-up discussion, and thanks for showing this path from investing in the public goods and how it has the influence on people's life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masha.
Let me introduce you to our next guest, Alan Jenkins. Alan is Deputy Director of the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and until recently was also the Science Director. Among his many other roles, he is Chair of the UK Committee for National and International Hydrology, Head of the UK Delegation to the UNESCO International Hydrology Programme, and Hydrological Advisor to the UK Government with the World Meteorological Organization. Alan, welcome. As you know, in the Global Weather Enterprise Forum, we like to explore the linkages between Hydromet services and other areas, especially in the context of the new decarbonized world. And one of the topics that is very prominent these days is nature-based solutions and the role they play in disaster risk reduction. Hydromet services also play a significant role in disaster risk management and reduction. How closely do you think nature-based solutions are linked to Hydromet services, and whether anything should be done to make these linkages even stronger?
Yeah, a big question to start with, I think. Let me just start by saying that nature-based solutions are obvious solutions. They're good in so many ways. And I don't need to go through why they're good. I'm sure everybody understands they're good for biodiversity, they're good for carbon sequestration, they're not engineered solutions, so on and so on. But it seems to me that we simply don't have enough information at the moment at our fingertips to make an assessment as to what kind of nature-based solution we should be aiming at. And in particular, we are often lacking Hydromet information. And I say that because, and of course I may be biased because I'm a hydrologist, but if we think about the natural system, the biogeochemistry, the chemistry itself, the biology, the physics, it's all driven by water. And unless you have an understanding of how that system works and what the feedbacks are, there's a great danger that in trying to engineer a nature-based solution, to try to impose a nature-based solution, which is not a fully natural solution, let's say, it's a nature-based solution. It's absolutely imperative in the longer term that you fully understand that system that you're manipulating, that it does the job you want it to do, but more importantly, that it doesn't cause problems in other areas. And without appropriate information to describe what's going on in terms of water, it's really tricky to design those solutions, and you're flying a little bit blind. And therefore, while I think the popularity of NBS for risk reduction, disaster risk reduction, and so on worldwide is good, I think we're still flying a little bit blind. And the more of these systems we can get in place, and the more that we can get experience from, the better position we'll be in. But I don't think scientifically we understand the systems well enough in all situations. And that's maybe a bad thing with regard to getting this methodology adopted. So that's my feeling. I'm just in broad terms, I don't think we have enough information. We particularly don't have enough information on the hydromet and how water moves through and drives these systems. And because of that, I have a nervousness that we're putting together the right solutions in the right places.
Thank you. Yeah, I hear you on the challenges of applying of nature-based solutions. Though, if I hear you correctly as well, there is a case made to why countries should be applying nature-based solution in a smart way. And similarly, there is a demand for better hydromet and early warning services. And yet, when it comes to funding, it is very often a challenge to get decision makers to prioritize areas like weather and climate services. So the question that I have is, how do you convince countries to invest in something like nature-based solutions? And if there are any lessons that we can draw from this process applicable to other areas like hydromet services, for example?
Yeah, another difficult question. And I think there are a number of reasons why it's difficult to get policymakers and funders to engage with nature-based solutions. One is, of course, that it's very difficult to have the confidence. As I said earlier, it's difficult to have the confidence and be able to demonstrate that this is the solution. This is the thing that's necessary and the most appropriate tool for the job. If we think of that from the point of view of modeling approaches, I mean, let's take, for example, flood and drought approaches where nature-based solutions are being put in place variously around the globe. And the problem is we don't really know how to put those nature-based solutions into our models, and therefore we can't really demonstrate what happens 20 years from now in relation once that system has been installed. And so that in some ways is not so convincing. Maybe we should focus a little bit more on the very broad benefits that can be gained from these nature-based solutions. So again, in terms of flood prevention, you know, we can demonstrate that we can demonstrate that extra storage in the natural environment, ponds, whatever you want to call them, are useful. Wetlands or manufactured or artificial wetlands are useful. There's a lot of studies to show that tree planting in appropriate areas can do things to slow down flood water, but I think there's a lot more science to do around that in the longer term. But anyway, all of those things can be put in place. And if you do that, there are many, many other benefits. So the world at the moment wants to plant trees because they want to achieve net zero carbon. Planting trees is a good way to go. Establishing wetlands, good way to go. Everybody wants to achieve zero loss of biodiversity or no further loss of biodiversity, or to improve biodiversity. What could be better for improving biodiversity than planting trees and making wetlands and so on? So maybe we need to stress a little bit more the integrated nature of the advantages that come from nature-based solution. And maybe we need to find a way to actually demonstrate that the solution that we're offering to the problem will solve the problem. But again, I would say the reason we find that tough is that we don't have that much experience yet. So it's a little bit of a leap of faith. And again, the things that I've been involved in various parts of the world, many of these nature-based solutions, we started to work on them maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but we still don't have the evidence that they are the perfect tool for that particular job, and that we couldn't have done a better job of flood protection by pouring a few million tons of concrete somewhere. So, you know, it's a tough one, and we're learning as we go along, I think.
Thank you very much. I take your point on the need to explore integrated nature of proposed solutions going forward. And I very much look forward to hearing from our panelists what they think on the same questions. Thank you very much, Alan. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'd like to just start by, we want to reflect on the two interviews that we've just watched. And as we've seen, basically, the NBS is not entirely a panacea, but we hope our discussion today will actually help us, in a way, refine the scale and scope of potential solutions using NBS. And actually, as Brendan had suggested in his interview, maybe the hybrid approaches and how hydrological, meteorological information requirements can support long-term sustainability of these solutions. And what I'd like to do is, in fact, in the order in which Vladimir introduced you, I'd like to start with Petra for your reflections on Brendan and Alan's comments. Over to you, Petra.
Yeah, so some really interesting input from both interviewees, and I agree with the need that we need to start focusing on how we can talk about NBS within a broader portfolio of drought and flood risk adaptation strategies. And the reason we need to do this is because if we want to think about how can we invest in nature-based solutions, how can we motivate countries, that both public and private sectors, to invest in nature-based solutions for their various broad spectrum of benefits that they can provide, we need to start talking about sustainable investments, because it's not just about reducing carbon emissions. We need to build resilience, and we need to ensure that there's a just transition for the most vulnerable to climate change and those most affected by climate action, so including affected by nature-based solutions. And we need to start making this look attractive in terms of returns on investment, both financial and non-financial. And to do this, we need the right type of evidence and in the right format in order to promote investors to invest in NBS, but as part of a sustainable investment. So as part of a broader portfolio of investment options which are sustainable. And one type of intervention is not going to provide the ultimate solution. I think that this needs to be, we need to understand this, and in development projects, we need to be able to start combining climate risk management strategies in ways that are equitable and in ways that consider thresholds and limits to change, importantly climate change. Now, nature-based solutions is definitely critical within this mix of adaptation strategies for drought and flood risk. We do already have evidence. We can model nature-based solutions. We can model the impact of nature-based solutions on changing drought and flood risk due to climate change. So we do have tools and methods and models to do this. And they are highly cost-effective in certain places, but they need to be equitable and they need to be sustainable. They can provide a wide spectrum of socio-economic benefits, as Brendan mentioned, but I do think we need to start integrating them, and we need to find a way to understand what type of evidence is needed to promote investments in NBS that are equitable, and we need to find the right evidence at the right scale at which the impacts of climate change are felt, especially on extremes. And this includes specific place-based evidence on the extent of that nature-based solutions can reduce drought and flood risk as well as changing drought and flood risk. And I just drawing on my research that I do with colleagues at the ACDI is that we know climate change is altering extremes, and given we're already implementing nature-based solutions, and we need to be testing their effectiveness, and I said already that we can do this in the models that we're using. And a great way to do it is to use recent extremes that we've already felt, and to understand what role did nature-based solutions play in reducing the impact of climate change on these droughts or floods that we've already felt. And to do this, hydromet services are key. So including climate data and information, so we can use this data and link it through to our ecological, hydrological, and social impact modeling. And I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
So thanks, Petra. I'd just like to say, I think we'll come back to this point about what kind of information is really needed and what would be the most effective. I'd like to now ask Natalie for her reflections.
Thank you, and thank you also for inviting me today. I think the first thing I really want to react to is Alan Jenkins' interview. And I think it's really important to come back to what do we mean by nature-based solutions. Because when I was listening to Alan speak, he seemed to imply that nature-based solutions were something that we might make. And that like an artificial wetland, like a sustainable drainage system. And that is one part of nature-based solutions, but it's not all. The definition of nature-based solutions, the one by the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is very close to the IUCN definitions, is that nature-based solutions are actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use, and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems which address social, economic, and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services, and resilience and biodiversity benefits. So I guess for me, what really I think is important to also reiterate is that when we are talking about, let's say, creating a new wetland, when we're talking about creating a drainage system, yes, there indeed, we may not have enough information. However, when we are protecting what is already there, when we are restoring something that has been degraded, we have more than enough information to look at the importance of nature-based solutions in that case. So I think that's already something that I really wanted to state, because I think it is important that it is more nuanced than just we don't have enough information. We do have enough. Now, when it comes to the hydrometeorological data, I totally agree on what Petra was saying. And also, even if we're thinking about natural ecosystems that are out there, climate change is going to impact natural ecosystems. That is clear. So having that type of information, hydromet information, and also good climate models will be really helpful in terms of modeling the impacts of climate change on nature, and therefore thinking about what solutions may be needed to help nature itself adapt, in the sense of we know that climate change makes species ranges move, right, towards conditions that are more suitable. So when we know, let's say, within an area, we have a forest type that is, let's say, protecting a slope from a landslide, understanding what the future conditions are going to be for that area will help, if we do have to restore that area, will help to select the correct tree species that will suit those conditions. And also in the sense of, if we are thinking about extreme extreme weathers, that will also be really helpful in terms of choosing, let's say, species that are strong and deep rooted, you know, so they are less likely to, let's say, also, you know, collapse when we're talking about more extreme events. So I think I will also leave it there for now.
We're kind of converging on what, you know, that we're recognizing that, yes, we need information, but we have to, I hope by the end of this, we'll come down to what information, right? It's like better models, but how much better? What do we need to do? So I could now turn to Breji, please, for your reflections.
Thank you, David. Yeah, good to hear all the speakers and the two previous panelists. I converge, but I will also maybe slightly diverge. I think it's not about NBS or green or gray always, right? I mean, it's about the full portfolio that we have in solving risk or in climate adaptation, and about using these different types of interventions in concert and in harmony with each other. And thereby, I think that part of the answer is we really need to improve our infrastructural practices and the way that we deal with infrastructure. Because basically, and as a civil engineer, you are actually get taught to work in the environment, right? You're building in an environment. So I think infrastructure needs to start respecting the processes and natural processes that nourish natural ecosystems, because nature-based solutions are not always about restoring some forests or planting trees. It's about nourishing the nature that is already there and that will be there forever. And how do we include these systems in our infrastructural practices? And to me, that means that we need to stop disconnecting flows of water, nutrients, of species, of sediment by constructing infrastructure. I see so many projects across the world where they place a levee or a seawall in front of a mangrove forest on the low water line. And this is first not good infrastructure building, because it means that your levee gets impacted all the time, but it also is killing mangrove forests at large scale without a reason, right? I mean, we need to set back these type of infrastructures. We need to start building roads in vulnerable ecosystems on piles. Actually, I think the natural process should be leading in our infrastructure development, and that will solve part of the issue. And then to me, it's also not a contest about where and what ecosystems, how much risk they protect, right? I mean, like I said, the ecosystem is there and it will give a certain level of protection, but also the time that we can, I mean, we rely on these ecosystems for a lot of other reasons as well. So, I mean, we need to nourish the ecosystems that are there. And I think in terms of data, the hydromet, what we need to do is we need to first start understanding the risk better and the hydromet hazards. And then we need to start understanding how NBS interacts with these hazards, of course. And what I lack a lot is systematic research and collecting data for validating numerical models that actually advances this field. So I notice we all are modeling in the world, but I mean, there's very little people that actually go out in the field and measure what do we need to know for these models? How are we going to improve these models? And I think every project starts with good data. And for example, with building a data system. So I've been working in delta systems in the world. There's important delta systems. There's not a single piece of hydromet information locally monitored in these delta systems. How can we start constructing seawalls in these systems with no data, with no system knowledge? Well, I rest my case here for now.
I mean, that's super important, Breji, and I think again, we'll kind of circle back on this observational requirements. Michael, finally, your chance.
Yep, thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and take part in the discussion. Very excited that the bank has increased its commitment technically and financially to nature-based solutions. And I'll again, like Brechia, offer a little bit of similarity and then a few differences between some of the panel points here. First, we actually do know a lot about mangroves and their coastal protection and restoration. Yes, we are still learning all the time, but we're doing these kinds of restorations at very large scales around the world. Using hydromet data, we do know that flood risk in general is increasing. And with the World Bank, we were able to show that even despite losses of mangroves, their wealth to nations for flood protection has been increasing in recent decades. So we've lost about 4% of mangroves globally in recent decades, but their wealth to nations for coastal protection has more than doubled to nearly $500 billion. Okay, I do want to turn the tables just a little bit, and Brechia was getting at this point as well. I would say we need some better hydromet data because we need to know when our artificial infrastructure is going to fail. We're in an environment where wave energy is increasing. We talk about increases in sea level all the time now and what risks that we may face from that, but we're not talking about the kinds of impacts that are likely really important to coastal infrastructure. That is, increasing wave energy overall and changing wave direction, which is going to decrease the life of coastal infrastructure. And we are very critically going to need to help people manage that flood risk. And we ought to rely a bit more on solutions that have managed to exist on our coastlines for many, many millennia. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. So, I mean, I'd like to pass this back now to Alan and to Brendan. And I think, in a way, Brendan, I just wanted to sort of throw in a comment, because based on what Michael just said in terms of failure of artificial infrastructure, I think this is where it's not one or the other, is it? It's not all about nature only, and it's in terms of this kind of habitat that you're talking about. We're living in these coastal environments, and we're living with existing investments in infrastructure that we still have to manage. And so as we see that overwhelmed, is nature going to come to the rescue if we manage it effectively? But Brendan, I'd like to open the floor to you for reflections on the panel.
Yeah, thanks, David. No, thanks to all the panelists. I mean, it'd be great to give them the floor to really talk about this a bit more and get their views on it. I agree, that it is not about green, gray, hybrid necessarily. We don't live in a world where every meter of the coastline or of our river systems is made up by projects, right? We don't do projects in every place in the world. So it's really this integration of nature into infrastructure investment, but also in the way we do our policies and the way we do our coastal river and urban management. I think that is really a key to getting to where we need to go. So fully agree with Brechia on that. I also fully agree with Mike on that we do know a lot, right? We know much more than what we knew a few years ago, and maybe Brechia, I can talk a bit more about the experiments they're doing in Deltares, where I went there actually last week to see the mangrove nursery, and they have a huge wave machine to actually, at some point be able to test what is actually the wave resistance of these mangroves. So there's a lot of information there, but there's also a lot missing, and I do also agree with Alan on that in many cases we have incomplete information, and the time that we have to plan infrastructure, to plan restoration projects, and to plan hybrid interventions is not always enough to gather all the data, to get all the information you need to actually decide, do Does it make sense to build an urban park here? Do we need drainage infrastructure? Does it make sense to restore mangrove here? Or are they not going to survive given the coastal dynamics and the sea level rise in this specific place? So there's a lot of information missing. I also would like, to hear a bit from the hydromet community for sure. And, where do we stand with, the wave forecast, the longer term outlook, the 50-year outlook? How reliable is that? Is that enough to plan your ecosystem interventions, or do we think that the uncertainty is too high there? So, let me stop there and pass it back to the team.
Thanks, Brendan. So, Alan.
Thanks very much. And look, I loved all of the responses, and whoever it was that put me right that it's not just about sort of engineered nature-based solutions. I completely agree. I was sort of glossing over some important bits there. So I take that criticism. You're right to point that out. And look, I really do agree that in terms of hydromet, better understanding of the risk and hazard and improving our models in that respect, absolutely fundamentally required. And whoever, maybe all of you made the point about the fact that nature-based solutions must be seen as a part of a portfolio of measures. That's absolutely imperative. I really get that, and I really support those points. I guess the maybe just one extra thing to say then is that Brendan just mentioned the fact that maybe we have to accept some, I think he was saying we have to accept some uncertainty. So when we plan these projects or when we decide on the solution, even if we don't know exactly what protection it's going to afford, whether because we don't have enough data or we don't understand the system, as long as we're honest about trying to assess that uncertainty, then I think that's important. And we need to, we just need to be aware of what level of protection are we going to afford and what the uncertainty is around that. And I would say that a good example of that is, some of you have mentioned global climate models. Well, in many parts of the world, those models are terribly uncertain. And we have to spend a lot of time in what we call bias correction. But, sometimes the bias correction is bigger than the estimate of some of the fluxes of water. And that, that isn't bias correction to me. Anyway, my point is there are huge uncertainties, and we have to make sure that we reflect that as we assess the portfolio of measures. Anyway, thank you, and really appreciate all the comments that have been made. They're really fantastic.
So this kind of brings us to we're very close to actually sort of opening up the floor to questions from our audience. What I would like you to reflect on is, what do you think are the actual information needs? What's missing? We've talked rather generally about we need this and that, but what should we be doing? When we look at a particular, we're looking at scales which are not enormous in terms of spatial scales. So we're presumably looking at what in meteorology we might call hyperlocal scales in terms of information, and what really is needed in terms of kind of the hydromet type of information that would really support this portfolio. I mean, what should we be doing? And I'd also reflect on a question that Masha would have made, I think, if she was moderating and she had written it down. It was about really, how do we actually work together? We have, in a way, two communities here who are very eloquently talking to each other, and yet we don't often have the opportunity to actually go the step further, and that is to actually work together. So if you could, in any order you like, just please jump in and just reflect on the notion of what information is needed, and also how do we go about kind of working together on this portfolio of solutions. The floor is open.
I'm happy to go first.
Yes, Petra, go ahead.
Okay. So first, I'm going to directly address your the question, but I thought just talking about the wide variety of nature-based solutions, just quickly bring in the fact that in southern African landscapes, in most cases, we're managing woody plant invasions and removing trees, especially in South African catchments, in order to build drought resilience. And this just shows you, when people think of tree planting, in many cases, nature-based solutions need to be context specific. And that is really, really critical. So I just thought I need to bring that into the conversation, because we're hearing about mangroves and planting trees, and I just wanted to bring in the Southern African open ecosystems perspective into the conversation. But now moving on to the question, the more direct question. I think that we definitely need a much stronger focus on monitoring and prediction or projection efforts in terms of NBS. So, and what we need specifically versus what we need like as an enabling environment is a bit different, but we definitely need capacity and infrastructure for hydromet surfaces to be better used and linked into nature-based solution modeling. And this includes relationships between academic institutes and hydromet services at different levels, and especially working with academic institutions near to NBS implementation sites and linking those into the national hydromet services, but also international hydromet organizations. So now more specifically what we need, I agree with one of the panelists where we definitely need more field-based, experimental, but also long-term data collection and field-based information. So we need sustainable field-based and remote sensing methods, but that we can bundle together using like data assimilation techniques to upscale monitoring and prediction efforts of NBS. So we need more instrumentation. I know this would differ depending on where you're from. So the UK has a lot more instrumentation on the ground than, for example, South Africa or other Southern African countries. And the reason we need this is because we need well-validated models, and in my case, like process-based models, we need well-validated models. And for this, you need hydrological and ecological long-term experimental field data, so going into the field, and especially in areas critical for ecosystem services. So basic monitoring equipment, and for Southern Africa, especially rainfall measurements in high altitude locations, and understanding the dynamics of various aquifer systems. In some of the mountains I work, we don't really know much about the aquifer systems, and that's really important. Then I just want to make one last point. Although we lack effective field-based hydromet instrumentation and associated long-term measurements, depending on where you're from, we also need to find new ways to reduce the amount of climate change data and information that is around that we need to use in our impact models. So thinking about smart ways to do sensitivity testing and using climate scenarios and stress testing to reduce the number of simulations and data required to make decisions that are grounded in science. So we need to also use a similar approach when we're dealing with the complexity of our own impact models. And essentially this brings me to the question of what level details is actually needed to inform equitable and sustainable management decisions around NBS, but that's still grounded in robust science.
Thanks, Petra. Anyone else?
David, yes. I would like to respond.
Please.
I think we did this global modeling of NBS across global coastlines, and what struck me is that hydromet data is actually in pretty good shape. There's a lot, and the developments are extremely rapid right now. So we have global surge models, there's global tidal models, they're extended with typhoons, there's global wave databases, right? There's global hydrological models, and basically their predictions are not the part where there's most uncertainty. The uncertainty for us is, if we talk NBS, is in elevation data. All this hydromet data and all runs on a topography, and we don't know anything about this topography, and especially when there's vegetation, it's really hard to estimate where is the bed level. And for example, for issues like coastal or fluvial or in urban, it's kind of the easiest, because from EO data there's like a concrete surface, so it's kind of easy to get the elevation from EO data. But for NBS and everywhere where there's vegetation, it's really hard to estimate base level or base elevation from Earth observation data or information. So what you need there is local LiDAR and investing in, so especially for coastal areas that are partly underwater, that are underwater part of the time, this elevation data is missing, and that makes the difference between whether something floods or not, because the mistake in the data is now exactly this difference about flooding or non-flooding.
Reggie, you raise a really intriguing question. I mean, a lot of us work in disaster risk management, and a lot of that is about LiDAR surveys, but they're done for other reasons. And it somehow seems that we ought to be pooling the resources. I mean, in many countries that we're supporting in the World Bank have large programs in actually LiDAR surveys, but they're focused really on DRM applications, and yet exactly the same or very similar technologies would be providing the answers I think you're asking, the answer the questions that you're raising. It's intriguing.
So if I could jump in here, I would say that I mostly agree with Brechia here, which is to say that indeed, if you're trying to assess, and I think mostly about coastal flood risk, and if you're trying to, and erosion, and if you're trying to assess these, yes, understanding topography is critical. But over the past 10 plus years, I would say, we've made a lot of advancements there. Yes, we still need better topography data in a lot of places. For us, in a lot of the modeling that we do for coral reefs and mangroves, what's really missing is bathymetry. So the quality of the bathymetry data is usually an order of magnitude less or more or worse than what we know about topography, and is increasingly becoming the most limiting data that we have. I'll also point to kind of one other thing that is actually critical in the interface here between kind of hydromet and solutions, which is we often have very poor data on existing defenses. That is often information very difficult to get. Sometimes it's secret, but most of the time it's actually just not well recorded. And that should be something that shouldn't be a huge leap in many places.
And thanks, Michael. I can pick up on a comment that if nobody wants to immediately jump in, but it's something that Lenny Smith has said in the chat, actually written to everybody, about we needing to better understand what solutions are likely to prove robust and what risk tolerances we're going to embrace. Our models will not soon supply the kind of detailed information being requested, and the cost of delay is large. And what he said is, what we need is to learn how to agree on how to act under these long-standing conditions and sort of dealing with uncertainty, I guess. Any thoughts on that, anyone?
I mean, I think one thing that I'd like to add is, a lot of the risk that we are now experiencing is due to the changes in the landscape that we, have undertaken. If you log the slope, you're more likely to have a landslide. If you make surfaces much more unpermeable with concrete, you're much more likely to increase, flooding. So in some sense, if you have that understanding that our actions have caused a lot of this change in risk, I'm not going to go into climate change, but so therefore, counteracting some of those land degradations that we have undertaken is definitely going to, benefit us in the long run.
Thanks, Natalie. How would we go about actually working more effectively together? I mean, obviously many of you do have kind of multidisciplinary programs. Petra's working across this whole landscape, I think, from the modeling, sort of meteorological modeling, all the way to understanding the ecosystem. And I'm wondering, are there things that we can undertake that we're not doing that would actually really accelerate the kind of work that we need to do to improve our effectiveness of our solutions? Any thoughts on that?
Do you want to reflect on it briefly? But to me, it is reaching out maybe to social scientists and other disciplines, because what we find is the basic bottlenecks or barriers for NBS to be taken up are often not in data or in understanding of the system or in modeling, but they are basically, for example, that each government has a Department of Infrastructure and a Department of Environment, and that as soon as you start to construct infrastructure, the Department of Infrastructure doesn't have the knowledge, the tools, the background to implement nature-based solutions. And then as soon as you start working with the Department of Environment, the Department of Infrastructure you may restore mangrove forests, and then suddenly the Department of Infrastructure may put a breakwater in front of it, or a levee across it, or a road across it. So I think this is one of the most difficult issues, of course, to tackle, but it's institutional and probably social. So the other thing I would like to mention is about land ownership. There's a huge potential to bring mangroves back in areas where they were, that we've converted to either land for living, but a lot is converted to land for food production. So we're talking agriculture for rice, but also a lot for aquaculture, for fish and shrimp production. And many of these areas are not productive, but they're not given up either. And that is where, to me, the huge potential is for restoration of coastal NBS, especially mangroves.
And I would add to this that we really do need, collaborative projects. Just a kind of example from the sorts of things that we've done. We've been increasing the amount of work that we do with the insurance industry. This has been kind of very beneficial for informing them about nature-based solutions. They often have a great deal of the data that's needed for risk assessment and understanding nature-based solutions, but no clients had asked them for that before. So then the clients have no idea that they have that information and could use it. Vice versa, we found that they're interested in, for example, being able to insure mangroves from damages and to be able to support their restorations. But what they really need are the fragility curves. That is, under what conditions are mangroves likely to fail in storm events? Can you define those probabilities? And that's often data that we have, but we hadn't thought about in that kind of context before. And so that collaboration can really lead to a lot of shared problem solving.
Alan, I saw you wanted to jump in too. So.
Oh yeah, I was. I'm agreeing, I think, with what everybody says. But look, I think, what we're talking about here is we like to think that we always work together, and we are working together much more than we ever used to, in my experience. But maybe we could be forced a bit more to undertake a more appropriate due diligence around some of these projects. Maybe we should be encouraged to, in doing that due diligence and exploring the options, forced a bit more to talk to our colleagues in other areas, and particularly in the behavioral science and the social science and so on, because it does get overlooked sometimes. And so it's not just, I guess what I'm saying is, it's not just our responsibility as scientists, but I think the people funding the projects and the donors and the governments and what have you should insist on that due diligence a little bit more.
I want to pick up a little bit on the social science aspects, and it's partly from experience of working in countries primarily on hydrological and meteorological projects, but with other components which are to do with trying to restore wetlands, but also recognizing the recreational benefit, but at the same time often leading to the people being moved from land in which they have been living, but have been living in danger, because these are often unstable from a livelihood perspective. And it seemed that it kind of touches on, I think, what you said. We're not explaining to the potential beneficiaries, the governments of countries, to the communities which are affected, sufficient information about the overall benefit of some of the changes that could be made. It could be substantially improve their social well-being, but it's not without risks, and certainly not without change within those communities. Some of you must have quite a bit of experience on that. Can you reflect on that, on the sort of the policy aspects a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really important when you are, as you say, you know, that link with the communities who are, let's say, the closest to the nature-based solutions. Sometimes, you know, even if you explain to them in a rational manner that this is going to improve their lives, you know, change is always difficult. So I think working with the people who are locally on the ground near areas where we could improve factors with nature-based solutions, the most important thing is, first of all, understanding what they need, why they, you know, and also why they may also be or not contributing to some of the, let's say, the land degradation, which therefore increases risk. And then finding with them the solutions to that. Like, so sometimes maybe it's not about, you know, getting better legislation or protecting a mangrove. Maybe it's about helping the people to have more efficient and better livelihoods, or even healthcare. Sometimes that's what's actually the real issue underlying the whole situation.
So that touches, it goes back to a point I made about the sort of relationship with disaster risk management, because we talk a lot about community-based warnings and community-based action and so forth. And, you know, part of the solution, once you've identified the threat, part of the solution is presumably to do certain things which are effectively nature-based in terms of mitigating your risks. And again, it doesn't seem to really appear very prominently in a lot of the discussions that we have. Any further thoughts on that?
So I'll just come in here and highlight that I really think that when thinking about nature-based solutions as providing solutions for global societal challenges such as climate change, what we really need to incorporate at a local level is equity, so social equity, but in the process, in the design planning of the NBS, of the nature-based solutions. And if you don't incorporate this into that design planning of the nature-based solutions, these won't be sustainable in the long run, and these won't be equitable. So I think that is core. And the point is that local context is so key, both in that design planning and implementation, but also in terms of information needs, in hydromet services needs. It's different depending on where you are and what system you're working in. So yeah, I thought that I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
I wanted to ask you another sort of question. Again, it comes back to how we bring the different communities together, and are we structuring our existing projects in the right way? I mean, are there ways of actually you know, bringing in the social scientists, bringing in the hydrologists, meteorologists into programs? And is it a research topic, or is it something that's an operational activity that could be undertaken? And for example, I would like to just direct this to Brendan first. I mean, if we have a lot of World Bank projects on nature-based solutions, as we saw at the beginning. Are there ways, do you think, of, given that we actually have programs in hydrometeorology, climate change and so forth, are there ways of really trying to couple those within the World Bank as an exemplar of how to go about this?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, and because I was gonna, if no one else wants to ask a question, I did want to follow up with, especially Brechtje and Mike, from that technical perspective now on what is actually missing. So I'm actually hearing, you know, what we know that's missing is the policy, like the dedication to the integration, the maintenance and operations, and doing this in a structured way, integrating it into investment operations. But from discussion, it's still not fully clear to me, like, what is actually the gap in our hydrometeorological understanding for doing this NBS sustainably. And do we indeed have all the information that we need to say, well, we can blend mangrove here, and given the wave climate in 30 years time, from what we know from the data, we know enough to actually say that, you know, we should be doing mangrove restoration here. So I think there's still, I would still like to hear a little bit more. And do we indeed have all that data? Do we have all that understanding? Or is there something that is still missing there that we should be doing on a project level, or at the national level, or at the global level? I think at the project level, we often struggle with not having enough time for preparation and analysis. And I think what we should be doing is starting early, having these people in the same room, right? Having the people that know about flood modeling, hydrological modeling, bathymetry data, having them in the same room with people who understand the local ecosystem and how these ecosystems behave, be it the wetland, be it the river system, be it the mangrove system. And people who understand, infrastructure investment and the complementarities between these ecosystems and the natural and the man-made infrastructure, basically. And to have these analysis done in a comprehensive way, and we have a few examples where that has happened in the world, but not enough, where we go through the physiological analysis, we go to the economic analysis, and make an integrated plan. And I think we should do that structurally for the projects that we are preparing, and we need to start as early as possible on that.
Any other thoughts on that?
No, it's not on mangroves, but I'm thinking of Kenya, where there's at the moment a lot of land, and also I guess Uganda, a lot of landslides that are being, and where the earth is just literally falling apart, and you've got water gushing from places where water shouldn't be gushing from places. Now, in certain parts of that area, people have got the idea, let's plant trees to keep the landscape together. However, that just randomly planting trees to keep the there, it's not actually working. And why is it not working is that somehow, somewhere, the hydrology of that area has been changed, whether that be due to where the roads have been put or how something. And so addressing that particular threat, there we are clearly missing hydrological data and to properly address that landslide issue. So I think in a certain sense, an answer, well, at least one of the answers to your question would be, it really, I think, depends on a case-by-case basis of where hydromet data is lacking. So maybe in some areas we have that data, but I know that at the moment in that region in Kenya, at least if that data exists, they're not using it. So, there is an issue.
I would say one of the things that I just have come back from Puerto Rico, where there's a great deal of disaster risk money available for projects following the 2017 hurricanes. It has not been applied to nature-based solutions. To really important and very good local projects, in a large part because they can't get over the hurdles of benefit cost analyses that are required by FEMA. But this is not just a US or a Puerto Rico problem. It is more broadly being able to do those benefit cost or cost effectiveness analyses under both current and future conditions, which can often limit the implementation at a project when you're trying to convince disaster risk managers to try solutions that are newer to them.
I would like to react on that too. I think to Brandon's question, I think with respect to data, we know a lot and we can actually do a lot only from global data. And we can advise based on global data what would be possible here, what kind of ecosystems you probably find there, what are the dynamics of coastlines, what are the river dynamics in this area. But it's like a stepwise approach, right? I mean, then we can run models, but without local data, the models, we cannot validate them. So we often do model predictions without validation. So in the end, to me, it's about we need to make these steps, but to improve our global data, to improve the global data that we have, we do need to go on the ground and start validating cases that we do. And there's, to me, two challenges there that will also that one is upstream downstream connection. We often look so small scale, but what happens on your coast is really linked to what happens in your river and who is doing a dam upstream or who is doing mining activities on sediment loads. There's very little data on sediment loads, and it determines what happens if your coastline is growing or eroding. Groundwater system, very important, should always be taken into consideration. We often do not know from global data if this coastline is stable or whether it's subsiding. And large groundwater extraction always leads to subsiding areas. And it's something we need to be in the field to assess. So I think you need to do all these steps. And then finally, one thing I think is extremely important, it was already said by either Petra or Natalie, but it's about field experimentation. And I think for nature-based solutions, but also for normal infrastructure, we need to be able to fail. And it means we cannot do things, implement things, and then run away. We need to implement something, monitor it, evaluate it, and then be able to adapt, because we're not always sure what we're doing. And then if we all run away, it will always fail. So we need longer term projects and allowing these projects to fail and learn from failures. And I think as a society, we do not like failures, and we're actually not learning from it. And then we lose a large opportunity to learn.
Roger, I think I'm going to say that was the last word. Thank you very much. And I'd like to hand I personally would like to thank you all for a really stimulating discussion, and hand back to Vladimir and to Brendan to wrap up. But this was very interesting. If you have the chance, have a look through the chat. There are a couple of questions. I think there's one on insurance that Mike actually had sort of answered in an earlier intervention. But if you have the opportunity, please and just reflect to the person asking the question. Thank you very much. Vladimir, Brendan.
First you and then me if you want to, or vice opposite, whatever you want.
Thanks, Vladimir. I think I said enough just to say, I mean, I think it's really great to see an actual panel discussion. So I've been in so many of these remote ones, and usually we all, people say their talking points, and then we all agree, and then say goodbye, and everyone is happy. But it's nice to see an actual discussion with people disagreeing and people thinking there's enough information, some saying we don't know anything, and probably the truth is somewhere, in the middle. So it's really nice to see this discussion from the policy, hydrometeorological, and the DRM and perspectives. A lot of areas, I think, to tag on for further discussion and potentially for some joint work with some of us around the table. So let's stay in touch and let's not make this a one-time discussion. Thanks.
Absolutely, I would agree to that. And from my standpoint, of course, which is biased, I was spending some 15 years of my life recently looking at one side, and I knew that nature-based solution is more complicated. But this illuminating discussion, and thanks for all panelists, showed me that the level of complexity which we face is smaller than if we look around and look at this adjacent area. But what is clear that, of course, there is no golden bullet, and many people discussed complexities here, lack of this, lack of that. But what also been useful to learn, that's reference to how to reduce risk, and that's where we, I believe, should work together as two communities. What are those protocols or that due diligence, which also was mentioned? How to minimize that exposure to this risk, and what would be that minimum package of data which we can provide jointly to minimize that risk. And that is still to come in our future discussion. But overall, very illuminating discussion. I'm very happy to be part of it for the future, and looking forward for our communication. Thanks again for everybody. And David, thanks for your moderating, and Tanya, thanks for your participation. We had from more than 200 participants, now still 80-something are surviving despite 1.5 hours of this discussion. So that's also a good sign. Thank you so much, and we will be back, I guess. As Schwarzenegger said, I will be back.